Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with Steve Gunn. So we did this interview back in August of 2021 when Gunn's new album, Other You, came out on Matador Records. You can also watch the video version of this on the Songwriters on Process YouTube channel. It's up there. And you really should, because there's one thing about Gunn, and that is he is very specific with his needs as a writer. And, you know, a lot of songwriters tell me, I've interviewed, like I said, 200 songwriters, over 200 for this site. And a lot of them say, you know, I write every day, but it doesn't really matter what I have with me and when I write and where I write. It doesn't really matter, but I do write every day. And then there's some that just write when the muse strikes. They don't write every day. They just write when they feel like it. And then we have Steve Gunn, who he says, by his own admission, he says, I'm very specific with my needs when I write. He has 2 notebooks, each a certain type and a certain color. He writes with a mechanical pencil, and he's got this certain setup he has to have at his desk. But he's not so tied to his routine. He's always fine-tuning it. So when things not working, he tries something else. So he recognizes when, you know, maybe the words aren't coming as quickly as he'd like, and he maybe adjusts that process. But he's always fine-tuning it. He does see movement as an important part of his process as well. He walks, he runs, he goes to Prospect Park, or he goes to art galleries. And all this movement is necessary because of his receptors, as he calls them. And he told me, he said, my receptors are always on because I don't want to miss anything I see or hear. I try to collect everything. He said they're always on. So that's why you'll rarely find him without a pencil and a notebook in hand. And in fact, if you watch the video, he has the notebook and the pencil in his hand during the interview. He always has them with him. And I think that's interesting because as a writer, I always tell people that the writing process is always taking place. It is not just taking place when you're writing. It's taking place when you're eating, walking, talking, sleeping, working out, whatever. And he recognizes that. So he's always writing, even though he's not actually putting pen to paper. And that's why those receptors are always on. So anyway, and again, the video version of this is on the Songwriters on Process YouTube channel. But for now, let's listen to Steve Gunn.
It's flipped. This is a drawing from my friend Lee Ronaldo, who's in Sonic Youth.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
We toured together, and he just draws all the time in the car. And he was making these drawings of the road, and they're really wonderful. And he gave that to me when we were traveling.
That's really cool. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. So I guess the first thing I always start with is how much writing are you doing outside of songwriting, whether it's journaling, you know, kind of thoughts like that. I do find that songwriters often tend to do writing outside of songwriting. So how much of that do you get to do?
I sort of write every day. I've gotten kind of into a routine of doing that. Whether I always have a notebook with me, because my receptors are always on, and in the past I've regretted like letting things pass through me and forgetting them.
Right.
You know, obvious things like overhearing someone say something, or, you know, any kind of inspiration. I try to document more because I tend to I make an effort to try to collect all of these things more, and be able to like look at them later, obviously, when I'm conjuring up, particularly in this discussion, songs. But yeah, I've learned that it's really beneficial to write every day. I'm not writing for any really long period of time, but just I kind of, you know, I've been sort of in a way kind of setting intentions, and also just free writing. I believe in free writing quite a bit, and I just kind of every morning I kind of just do an entry and thinking about my own thoughts and even just things that are circling around in my mind. And I think it's really important to put those down as a creative person, you know.
Are these organized thoughts, or is it journaling with intent of, dreams or the day or something like that? Or how organized are those thoughts when you write them?
They're not very organized. It's more of sort of a free form entry, I'd say. But usually lately it's interesting because right now I have two notebooks that are the same size. They're almost identical, but they're different colors. And one of them is my sort of morning notebook, which is kind of my intention setting and just observing myself a little more. And it's more of like it's not like a complete it's not like your standard idea of journaling, but it's just my daily sort of entry. And then my other notebook is more of lyrics, tidbits of, if I'm at, for instance, if I'm going to the MoMA or something like that, I'll write, names of paintings and artists that I discover, or details of my music life, like tunings of my guitar or to-do lists. And it's sort of more of a creative idea of, expressions of that sort. So I carry those two notebooks with me. I try not to do this much, but I write things on my phone as well, or take notes and that sort of thing. So I'm constantly keeping track of that aspect of my sort of, just exploration.
And how often do those things make their way? Are you going back to those journals for song ideas? Is there a do you go back to them with intention and say, hey, let me look through and see where's an idea I can maybe write about?
Yeah. I think for the most part, lyrically, and there's, I think when I set a goal for myself, particularly like for a record, for instance, I'll write a little more. I did a lot of free writing. I read a lot of poetry and fiction and literature and stuff. And I kind of try to get more immersed into like the project, and work with certain themes and certain structural elements. And for instance, when I was working on this record, I had a bigger notebook and I had it with me when I'm sitting at my little studio with my guitar. The notebook is a very important component of my process, my songwriting process, where the lyrics, I also transcribe a lot of the ideas on my computer so I can play. And I really like playing with lines where I can take a line and grab it and throw it to the bottom of the song, or take a line from another song. So I believe in typing everything out. And actually, I also did a process of writing it out just by hand, and really like almost kind of reading it back to myself in a certain respect. And there was a lot, and particularly with this one, there was a lot more of this sort of editing process. And the notebook was definitely an important companion with my album, because it was basically all the ideas that I was generating for the record were all in this book. And essentially I was sort of trying to make sense of it all. And the other step was taking all these tidbits of things and organizing them in a different place, which was my computer. And then I also have a recording set up. And so I was just playing and playing and playing and trying stuff and singing and editing words. And with music too, with some of my processes, the sound of words is quite important. I guess that sort of coincides with poetry practice, and it's sound and it's rhythm. So it's sometimes words will just sort of appear or change into something where the meaning will kind of come back to me in a different way. So the process is experimental in nature in that respect, where it's somewhat nonlinear, I suppose. So I really enjoy that process. But to get back to your question, is like I definitely have had this notebook. Like I'm tethered to it as I'm working on the album.
So you start on the notebook, then you go to the typewriter from there, or where does the typewriter come in?
It's interesting. Like so I would go from the notebook to not a typewriter per se, but my computer. I guess that's
okay.
So putting these ideas in a Word document of some sort, and that was just a step. So then you can with song structure too, you can kind of work in the verses, that kind of thing, where you're working in the rhythm and you're working with the verses. Obviously there's changes in choruses and things like that. So essentially there's an overall theme, which might not necessarily be the title, but there's a theme happening. And so if I have a chunk of something, maybe it's one verse, I'll put that onto the computer. And then the more free form stuff, ideas, visual sorts of like thoughts, poetic lines, anything that I find inspiration circling around this theme, I'll start scribbling in the notebook. So it's like this sort of just all kinds of different things that are elements that I'm thinking about don't make it onto the computer. So I'm trying to kind of like cultivate the words by just writing anything about these certain themes. And that could be pages and pages of just things. There's, along with that, I'll have like visual references or photos on my phone of things. So then I'll type it out. And I also, having so much time on my hands, this was something that I hadn't done before, which was printing out, like holding a printout of some stuff and leaving my space and going outside, going to the park, going up on my roof, or I have another rehearsal space where I would carry a folder of stuff and I would, with a pencil, cross things out, change words. I think that process really helped me too, kind of getting out of like my confines of, because I tend to kind of fall into just habitual patterns, habits, personal stuff where it's like, okay, I'm on my computer, and you suddenly have access to the internet, or you have your home and you're like, oh, I guess I'll look for I got to go on Reverb and look for this one pedal that I need, or like work on some emails, or go make a little more coffee, there was an importance in kind of like, okay, standing up and like, putting on some shoes and taking a walk. I did a lot of walking and a lot of listening to my own stuff and to other things, but also just taking those words printed and going and sitting in the grass somewhere and feeling a new sort of, almost like trying to kind of detach myself or kind of getting a more aerial view of what I was doing, rather than like crouched in front of the, like,
right.
Because I have a whole thing. I had the whole setup. I got, like, I'm at the table, I'm at my desk, I've got my guitar, I've got the microphones, I've got the computer. You can kind of, sometimes I can kind of get caught in like the hamster wheel, so to speak. So
right.
For me, it was important to break out of that,
Okay, I have so many questions. First of all, because you mentioned notebook, and I see you actually were holding a pen at some point, I think. There you go. So I found that songwriters are extremely particular about type of pen, color of ink.
Yes.
I mean, I could do a whole site dedicated just to that, just to color of ink, brand of pen, and brand of notebook.
Okay. So I'll show you my notebook. Hold on.
Yes, perfect. Let's do it.
And color is important as well.
I should say, let's tell, we're not selling anything here, but yes, I mean, these are not affiliate links that are going to be later on in this video, but to me at least, and then I'll let you. I think my take on this is it's an element of confidence, right? If it's John Yell from the Mountain Goats told me that he wrote one of his albums at the dining room table because that's where the mojo was, and it's an element of confidence, right? Yeah. So go ahead. So let's show and tell here. Let's see.
Okay,
how important is that to you?
It's very important. It's so interesting that you asked me that, because I'm extremely specific with my needs, and I find it funny because because of how specific it is. And I've made a number of albums now, and I save everything. I save all my notebooks, and they're all the same color, and they're all the same sort of. I have like a decent collection, and so basically, my main notebook, like my bigger one, the one that I sort of like transfer. Like my big album notebook is this. It's like I for some reason I started getting into the marble, sort of like old school marble composition books.
Yes.
And that's exactly, like, it's so specific, but that's what I need. And I have so many of these, and this is the notebook that I used for my album, and it's all just like lyrics and tunings and ideas, and just basically, and it's so I'm so happy to have this, because I've gone back to some of the older albums, and I can like kind of look and see like what was happening. And
yeah,
it's funny to see sort of, just like ideas that became something that are just sort of generating, and like how it kind of all unfolded. So this is the notebook that's sort of like the one that I can't lose for the album. And then the one that I was talking about, that's just my sort of in my jacket pocket kind of thing, it's a moleskin.
Okay.
It's all purple. So that's the theme. It's my favorite color.
Yeah.
So I gravitate to that. And so I have two of these. I mentioned I have a second moleskin that's a different color, that it's a baby blue. That's my like daily entry. And this is my more sort of just like notes, to-do lists, lyrics, everything. And it's just full of all kinds of stuff. And pencil and pen wise I believe in the pencil. And I love mechanical pencils because I do a lot of erasing. I have extremely sloppy handwriting as well. Sometimes when I'm writing quickly, I realize it's like I might not even be able to read certain words. So I like erasing. I can't, like, if I didn't have a mechanical pencil, I'd be scribbling quite a bit. It'd be like a lot of scribbling out. So I like, I know it's not such a permanent sort of tool, but with the option to erase and to edit, I feel like it's a good device.
That doesn't make you nervous, though, that if you erase it, it's gone forever, rather than if it were a pen and you crossed it out, you could still go back and go, what did I write again?
Yeah, I do. I'm very careful with what I erase. Usually it's just more of like things that I can't read, or I don't know. You're right, but I think it's nice to just, if something sounds, there's a lot of things that I write that I know that I don't need.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'll just take that out,
So if you are ever writing lyrics on the computer, and by the way, I have talked to a couple of songwriters who actually love typewriters, like legitimate typewriters.
Yeah, that would be. That sounds like a really cool thing to have, because it slows you down.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, considering the times that we're in, you can dictate stuff on your phone, which can be helpful as well. But the fact that you have to sort of like slowly, like physically work something out.
Yeah.
You're essentially reading it again, and it's
right.
It's coming back to you, and you're looking at it again. And that seems helpful for sure. So
if you are, let's say you're typing lyrics on the computer versus, pen and paper, because I've heard this before, I've read discussions with authors, and do you find that the lyrical content and everything about those words change if you are ever writing lyrics directly onto the computer or your phone versus pen and paper.
Yeah, I think with I, with like basically the advantage of the computer is I was doing a lot of free writing, so you can kind of get into more of a stream of consciousness exercise where you give yourself 10, 20 minutes with no restrictions, you don't have to hold back. You can kind of write anything, kind of conjure up ideas and imagery that way. Rather, like obviously writing can be like physically writing can be helpful and to slow you down. But I think that when you can just sit there and just type and kind of let yourself go a little bit is a nice exercise for me. And it's been pretty rewarding with, because sometimes for instance, I just think of a theme or something. I think of an idea, and I would kind of just free flow write about that for an extended period of time. And often it's not easy, and you can be writing something really dumb, but I think that it can be really beneficial. That exercise, it taps into a different part of your mind.
Sure.
And when also for me, I don't necessarily think of myself as a standard songwriter per se. Like I'm not going from point A to point B to point C to resolve and to back to point A kind of thing. For me, I'm trying to conjure up more of a feeling and more imagery. And I think that typing can really help that way. And then I take chunks that I like. You can create another document, highlight, click and drag is also a good tool.
We all have our places maybe where we tend to be more stimulated than others by, things you see, things you hear. Are there places that you go, or maybe you're in a rut and you think, yeah, if I go there, I think something will come?
Yeah, I had a few places. I mean, I live in Brooklyn, and the parks became very important to me. And there's a park that I love, and I came to love even more this past year. Was Prospect Park, and it's not too far from here, and I was going there quite a bit. I'm also close to another park called Fort Greene Park. So I was going there quite a bit, and Prospect Park it's bigger than Central Park. It's 500 acres, and there's all these trails, and there's all these interesting sort of like sections of it. There's a graveyard. There's an old house. They've managed to work. They worked on the trails so you can kind of almost do a hike, and I think it's one of there's a natural forest there as well, so you can kind of really immerse yourself in nature there. And I was definitely doing that, and bringing my notebook and listening to my demos and sitting down and either reading or writing. And I think taking my stuff, because I internalize so much of it, and it starts living inside of my immediate space and just in myself, that when I was like taking myself out of my confines, my physical confines, it was like a nice way to loosen up and just be open and get another perspective. I'd like to say, I mean, I love looking at art, and I found, particularly I was going to the Modern Museum of Art when it was open, of course, quite a bit. And there's a permanent collection there there's some paintings that I revisit, and just generally just to go and kind of, be inspired by visual artwork is something that was quite important. And reading about the artists and their intention and what they were going through and where they're from and their trajectory, and usually it's very rich in story. And that was something that definitely it has been, but is an important part of my process too.
Yeah, what about that? Because if songwriters tell me art galleries are often places that they go where they get inspired. And what is it about going to an art gallery that makes you think, oh, that painting is going to inspire me to write a song?
I think for me, it cracks through a certain sort of boundary, particularly for what I'm trying to conjure up and what I'm doing. And I think observing artwork, particularly like abstract artwork, where it's so immersive and some of it's so visceral and emotional, and it's otherworldly, and it's almost as you're going to this other dimension essentially, and it's so expressive as well. So for me to kind of go and to be alone and to kind of have this time to experience that is very nurturing to my creative mind, and it conjures up different ideas that if I was going to go look at something very specific, which is also great, can guide me into another way. But for me, I was, particularly for this record as well, I was just trying to kind of open myself up and really be receptive to everything: color, sound, the sky, just overall expression, not to sound cliche.
Right.
And so then I would go see, it was almost, in a way, it was almost, it can also be kind of a meditative practice as well, where you can be in a place and be with, you're literally there with this piece. You're not looking it up on your computer. And for me, a lot of that artwork is about being present and being with this piece and experiencing it, and also gaining something from it that is yours. It's not necessarily an overall intention, but the way that you can learn how to be receptive to it, I think you can build up the way that you see, your visual interpretation of things. And I've built that up over the years, I think, and I feel more open to it later in my life. And I definitely feel like it's a guide even when you're feeling stuck. I think that,
yeah.
And I think a lot of concepts of abstract art are breaking those barriers of being quote unquote stuck in their formulas and the way that they learned how to be an artist. I think that the sort of beginnings of expressionism in painting were changing the way that you see and changing the way that you express certain emotions and how you express reality, and how you can mix both, and how that can be an incredibly beautiful relationship. And for me, that those ideas of art coincide with my sort of idea of creating songs.
You mentioned movement earlier, and this is something a lot of songwriters bring up: the role of movement to the process. So many of them talk about walking, running, swimming, hiking, theories about bipedal movement. Stone Gossard of Pearl Jam told me, I think a year ago, about how he has a whole theory about walking and bipedal movement and the cadence of the walk.
Yeah. True.
Giving him melodies and rhythms. And it sounds like that's happening with you. I think you mentioned that earlier, but I want to expand on that role of movement, whether it's to get unstuck or generally in the process. And it can be even driving, right?
Yeah. Sure.
How important is that to you?
It's very important. It's kind of an essential part of certainly my life. My life has revolved around movement. I think my music particularly reflects a lot of that. There's a lot of people tell me that they they like to listen to my music on road trips and things. And I think that, sorry, there's a truck beeping outside. I think that in the past too, I was writing while I was moving, like while I was traveling, while I was on the road. And for me, and when I was talking about getting out of my confines and getting away from my desk, getting out of the room, unlocking the door, and being looking around in my being open to everything that's outside, was a huge source of inspiration, and movement particularly is always an inspiration and has been. And even when I was writing this album, I got really into running. I've been running for a couple of years, but I got more into it. Obviously, I have more time, and I felt like the momentum of that. I certainly think about the sort of the relationship of movement and with mental and physical sort of aspect of that, and how it can be a way to exercise your mind and to really also let go. I think I was working on tons of demos. I have this habit of recording everything and almost listening, trying to be like another set of ears listening back to what I'm doing. And I think running, for instance, walking as well, and driving too, I'll bring that up, is a great way to step out of yourself and to almost like shut off certain elements of your thought process, and like really just you're essentially sort of just it's becoming a guiding force in a different way. And there's a different perspective, in my opinion, whether I'm listening to my own stuff and trying to kind of figure out what I'm doing, or generating thoughts and just the experience. For me personally, it really helped me open up more. I think any way to kind of put myself and my mind in a different place, obviously in a healthy way, is something that, being a creative person and trying to conjure up ideas, it's something that is an important part of my process. I'm not a person that's just going to sit for 6, 7, 8 hours and write something wonderful. It's not how I do it. It's not how I work. I'm constantly trying to gather things,
Yeah.
Like one of the only times I really listened to my new album all the way through. I don't listen to it too much, but I knew that I wanted to get on I-95. And when I hit that stretch where it's 60 miles, that's when I want to hear my record, because I'm moving through, I'm like my physical, my molecules are literally like lurching through space, and I can kind of experience the space of my music as well in that space. And it's a different experience, rather than if I'm going to sit at my desk with my elbows on the table and like listen to the record. I don't know. It's more of an experiential sort of situation.
I imagine you're a voracious reader. So let's talk about who you like to read, poetry, fiction, nonfiction. How important, I know it's important to you, but obviously, who are some of your favorite authors?
I think,
or genres, maybe.
Well, I was for this album, I was reading a bunch of stuff, but I was thinking about like memory a lot for this album, and I really love Sebald, his work, and particularly Austerlitz and The Immigrants, and just in some of his other books as well. But like the way that he uses a lot of photos, and he also, some of his writing is based on memory, and it's like these snapshots that sometimes have got visual guides, and he's telling this narrative from different people's perspective. I don't know. He has this really mystical, sort of beautiful way of using language as well, that I just really found very, very inspirational to me.
I'm very distressed that so few songwriters read poetry. I don't hear that very often. So is poetry a part of your general reading as well?
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. And I was, reading a bunch, and poets, a lot of the beat stuff, of course, that I love. And I quite like John Ashbery's poetry and his kind of concept of playfulness. I know that's a sort of a primary concept, but his playfulness of language, and almost as if certain times he was kind of almost making up words or something like that, where he was trying to describe certain things and using language in a very interesting and really beautiful way. I love his work. I like a lot of like nature poems, like a lot of stuff that I was reading. Like I really became enamored with Mary Oliver. And like I was aware of her work before, but I kind of, when I was working on this album, she passed during that time.
Yeah.
And I started kind of learning more about her, and also reading more of her work. And it really was, to me, it was so beautiful because she kind of came from some hard experiences and had a lot of emotional sort of baggage and history, but she lived in Maine and kind of cultivated this new way of seeing. And I think a lot of her poetry reflected both her letting go of that, but also this newfound appreciation of her environment. And also like Saybold was dealing with a lot of memory and a lot of sort of emotions, and trying to kind of create a separate sort of universe for yourself, and almost in a way transcending the pain of all of the experience and creating something more beautiful.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.